Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns.
Hello, and welcome to Keto Life Support. This is Kim Howerton with episode 198. And today we're doing a little bit of Q&A specifically about blood glucose. All right, so the first question, blood sugar. I'm going to summarize the question. I'm eating under 20 total grams of carbs a day, and yet my blood sugar still isn't coming into the range that I need it to be. What's going on? Why isn't it working? So I think to really understand this question, we have to look to understanding how our body manages blood sugar. So let's talk about like in a healthy human. What are the mechanisms for disposal of blood glucose? So let's say you eat a food that contains glucose, right? And you're going to start to digest that. The first thing we're going to have are even release of hormones as we start to chew. We're going to release certain digestive hormones. We're going to get signaled with early phase insulin response as it goes into our gut and starts to get broken down. We're going to be signaled that incretin hormones, GLP-1 and GIP, are going to signal the release of insulin to our pancreas. In a person who is healthy, not a type 2 diabetic or insulin resistant yet, that response is actually going to be the majority of our insulin response in terms of eating a food. So that initial, while it's still in our gut being digested right away, it's going to signal our body to release enough insulin so our blood sugar doesn't go sky high. Then we're going to continue to digest that. That food's going to get broken down. Some of that glucose is going to be released into our bloodstream. As that glucose is released into our bloodstream, the majority of that is going to be taken up into our muscles. So our muscles require glucose. Where do we store glucose in our body? We can't store much in our blood. That's just the highway. That's where it travels to and from, right? So it goes to our blood, then it's going to get sucked up into our muscle and our liver. So those are our main storage areas for glucose. When the glucose gets stored in our muscle or our liver, it's converted. We call it something called glycogen. It just means stored glucose, okay? So our muscle is the primary disposal area for glucose. But for muscle to absorb glucose, the muscle has to be, one, healthy enough, and two, need glucose. Your muscle will eventually get full, right? And so if you're completely sedentary, like you're in a coma, right? You're not moving, you're not using your muscles at all. Your muscles will fill up, then none will get used up, and they will just sit and you're like, look, the inn is full. You can't take any more glucose in this muscle. And that spillover is going to mean, oh, the liver is the only place where we can keep piling it up, and the liver will get fatty, right? Will get bigger to try and accommodate all this glucose storage. So in the process of a body remaining healthy, for a body to remain healthy, the influx of glucose can't exceed the usage of glucose, right? So that's kind of what glucose does in a healthy body. What breaks down in somebody who's developed insulin resistance is that at the level of muscle, that muscle is resistant to taking in that glucose. And often that means that there's an infiltration of fat into our muscle. We are constantly in the process of muscle turnover in a body. And what that means is we eat protein and our body breaks down protein and we add protein. So there's a flux in and out. And with that, we have an opportunity when we tell our muscle we need the muscle to do stuff, when we use our muscle. So a combination of that push-pull of ingested protein and muscle usage, it continually replaces the muscle in our muscles. That was sort of redundant, with healthy muscle. But when we don't have the proper push-pull, and especially we don't have the proper pull in terms of us using our muscle, at least minimally, we can get into a circumstance where that muscle becomes more fatty than lean, and then that muscle becomes dysfunctional. And so one of the things that can happen over time is we exceed our body's ability to deal with glucose. This person is saying, though, I don't eat a lot of carbohydrates, so I shouldn't be getting a lot of glucose into my system. But the reality is that we need glucose in our body, whether we're eating carbohydrates or not. There's a minimal amount needed for our brain to function, for red blood cells. And so because of that, even if we ingest 0 grams of carbohydrates, our body is still going to be in the process of making glucose. And some of the places that can break down, I just told you about what happens often early in the process of becoming insulin resistant, is that your body starts to not be as good at disposing of glucose in the muscle. You can also become insulin resistant at the liver, become less good at disposing of glucose into the liver and storing it there. Then the other place we store glucose is in our fat cells, right? So we start to put extra sugar into our fat cells, but those can also become full. And now we're in a full out crisis situation. So some of the things we can do to help the process would be to lose some body fat, to go below our personal fat threshold there. We can start to improve the quality of health of our muscle. We can reduce the fat in our liver. So all of those things together are going to look like a combination of stop over challenging your body with glucose. If you're insulin resistant or type 2 diabetic, so it's a continuum of the same thing. Your body is telling you have basically carbohydrate intolerance, right? So you can't put too many in, your system can't handle it. Once you do that, a lot of people do see their circulating glucose go down, but you might still have problems internally that need to be healed or worked with, right? If you still have fatty liver, that might take a little while to work on it. You still have unhealthy muscle, you're going to have to use those muscles to start to convert the unhealthy muscle to healthy muscle. And then there are other things that can raise glucose in our body. Stress. So having high stress, poor sleep, they work together. The body considers poor sleep and high stress very similarly. They both raise cortisol levels, and cortisol signals glucose release. You can also be insulin resistant at the level of your pancreas, which means that your glucagon, which is supposed to be suppressed when you're having an insulin response, is no longer suppressed. So you can have both high insulin and high glucagon, and glucagon signals the liver to release more glucose. And so you might have a situation where things have just progressed far enough that you're not able to jump into normal glucose levels rapidly. And it might take some time for your body to heal. And so that means, as I said, I'll just go over it again, you're going to want to not ingest too much glucose or too much carbohydrates that will turn into glucose, right? So it sounds like you're handling that by being on a very low carbohydrate diet. Then you're going to need to watch your stress level, watch your sleep, make sure you're getting plenty of sleep, that you're not overly stressed. I know it's very hard to do, but do what you can, because both of those things are going to affect glucose levels without any food involved. Then you're going to need to create places for that glucose in your body to be better stored as your body is getting used to better utilizing your internal supply. And so that's going to be, working on having healthier muscle. That means perhaps some resistance training, some walking for 10 minutes after each meal. That's going to help your body dispose of the glucose rise that comes from that meal in a way that does not work as well if you're sedentary, right? So taking walks after you eat doesn't have to be a long one, just getting some exercise after you eat. If you can't leave the house, maybe it's pouring rain, do some squats, sit up, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, right? Just get your leg muscles moving. The heel lift, right? Sitting, you're like bouncing your legs, like lift your heel off the ground, lower your heel to the ground, lift your heel off the ground, lower your heel to the ground. That's a way of utilizing, if you can't stand up, right? Maybe you've got some health problems that make your balance rough, or you have some impairment. If you can use your lower leg, even in a fully seated position, that can trigger your body to use some glucose better. So then we run into the place where it's like maybe there is some damage that either will take a long time to heal or might not be able to be healed. And that's a bit of a tougher pill to swallow for some of us. But you can actually have impairment at the pancreatic level that is irreversible for some people. And that means even on a zero carbohydrate diet, they may still see higher blood glucose than they think they should. And that would have to do with how well your body is releasing insulin and the insulin to glucagon ratio of your system. And in that case, really medication is the right approach, because just like a type 1 diabetic can't make an appropriate amount of insulin to survive, when we have conditions like advanced type 2 diabetes, some people have permanent changes to their pancreatic function. And so if that's the case, and you've done everything you think you should be doing, and you think you've done everything you can, and these numbers are still looking out of control, I just want you to know there's no shame in saying, I'm going to need some intervention here. And there are lots of alternatives to insulin. Even things like these GLP-1 medications, they help your body use its own insulin supply a little bit better, and they seem to be very beneficial. I'm not talking about them in a weight loss context here. I am talking about them in a type 2 diabetes context. They will not work for type 1. You don't make the insulin, you can't use it better. Obviously, there are some people that might need to be on insulin, but those are people that don't make enough insulin. If your body still makes plenty of insulin, it's just resistant to it, then that's something I would say talk to your doctor about non-insulin alternatives for sure. Metformin always being a great one. By the way, I'm not a doctor and this is not medical advice. This is things to talk to your doctor about, just things that you should know to talk to your doctor about. The main thing I want to get across from my point of view is to say, please don't feel shame about this not working out perfectly the way that you think it should, that you should be fixed instantly, that you can undo a lifetime of bad habits in a month or a year. It can take some serious amount of time, and it says nothing about who you are as a person or how able you are to stick to something. Sometimes body's going to body, and you've got to get some help with that, and that's okay. But again, there are lots of things you can do. You got to get the foundation right, change the way you eat, change the amount of glucose that's coming into your system from the foods you choose, and then do all you can to improve your body's ability to be healthy, more movement, more muscle stimulation, and lower the stress, improve the sleep. And on the other side, do what you need to do when those things aren't enough. But in a lot of people, they are. But if they're not in you, doesn't mean anything bad. All right. A related question I got was someone asking me if I could talk a little bit about CGMs. So CGMs, continuous glucose monitors. These are little sticky pads. Like you put one on your body, it sticks to your body, and it measures your interstitial fluid, which is the fluid that's just under your skin. The great thing about that is if you were trying to directly measure your blood, you'd have to stab yourself a lot deeper, and that would not be manageable from a pain point of view and the risk of infection. Like there'd be a bunch of risks to having a constantly open channel to your glucose level. But luckily with the interstitial fluid, it is a proxy. They can use it to measure your glucose. And so it's perfectly reasonable to do that. There are two main companies that make these devices in the United States, Abbott and Dexcom. And so I believe right now, they always have new generations. I believe right now it's the Abbott Freestyle Libre 3 and the Dexcom G7, I think, are the newest models of each. Obviously, there are reasons to stick with the newest models. They make improvements, they get better. Dexcoms and Abbott Libres work a little bit differently. The overall opinions I get from most people are that the Abbott for most people are a little more economical and the Dexcoms are a little more accurate. And so that's going to come into play in your choice. The thing that I like to bring up to people is how useful a CGM is going to be for you really depends on your circumstances. So, what is the benefit of a CGM over like pricking your finger when you want to test your glucose? It's definitely a lot more convenient. A continuous glucose monitor, you just pull up your little phone app and you can look at your glucose on it at any time. Whereas if you want to do the finger prick testing, you got to actually prick your finger. You got to give yourself a little stabby in the finger to test your blood. And so it's a little messier. It's a little harder to do in front of other people. Looks like you're like, why are you bleeding at the table? Right? You can't really do that. So it's harder to do on a regular basis. So if you're trying to like monitor yourself over the course of a day, a CGM is very helpful. I think a CGM is very, very helpful for anyone who's not sure they're eating the right way for themselves, like not sure why their blood sugar seems higher than it should be. What is triggering that? What are my patterns, right? Because it gives you the course of the whole day. But there are some people that I would say you're not going to get out of it everything you hope. So this population of people tends to be people who are already eating very low carb, and they're trying to understand things like, why is it 90 sometimes and 85 other times? CGMs are not accurate enough to be able to tell that because there is a range of error. And that is somewhere, they say it's up to 20%. It might be a little lower than that for the most part, but that still means that if you're like talking less than 10-point differences in terms of nanograms per deciliter, you're not going to be able to actually see that accurately enough to interpret it to mean anything. So if you're someone who's just like, I am a biohacker and I want really detailed, down to the little nitty gritty information, you're going to be disappointed. It's not that pinpoint accurate. What it's great for is, hey, my blood glucose was 90 and now it's 140. It's not good for, hey, my blood glucose was 90, now it's 95. Why is that, right? Because a 90 is really the same as a 95 in terms of the range of accuracy. So just know yourself and know if that's going to drive you crazy, and know if you're looking for it to help you interpret things that are impossible. And if that's you, you're probably not a good candidate. But if you're somebody who's like, my blood sugar fluctuates between 100 and 200 on the regular and I don't understand it, then you're probably a good candidate. You got bigger sweeps. It's going to be helpful. So what I would do is, if you want to use a blood glucose monitor like a CGM specifically, and you're not a diabetic and you're not going to be able to get a prescription from your doctor, I would still bring it up with your doctor, because your doctor is allowed to write you a prescription for something that you don't get covered by insurance. So they write you a prescription, you go into your local Walgreens or whatever, and you ask them for the prescription and they will give it to you. You will have to pay for it directly. I can tell you with the Abbott Freestyle Libre, I've paid somewhere around $65 for a month supply. That's 2 little sensors, and that's out of pocket. And a lot of times your pharmacy might have a coupon. The most I've ever paid for a single sensor was $60. So it can vary. I hear that Costco has the best deal on the Dexcom. And so it will be beneficial for you to shop around and see what the price ranges are, and always ask your pharmacist if they've got a coupon in their system, because oftentimes they do. You don't even have to bring it in. It's just in their system and they can give you a better price. Now, if your doctor won't write you a prescription and it's still something you want, there are services out there that can help you get a CGM. One of them is called Levels, Levels, and the other one is NutriSense. Those are companies where they have doctors on staff, and that those doctors will write you a prescription through their service. Obviously, they charge you for this service. So there's like a baseline fee of like $99 or something. You'd have to check in with them to know what they are. And then you also have to pay for the sensors. I believe when I looked into it once, it was close to $200 for a month, because you have to pay extra for the service. But you can look into those kinds of things. I will say that I have searched on the internet for CGMs and found places that will sell them to you through just a Google search. I cannot comment on if you'll actually get one, right? You're supposed to need a prescription. I don't know if this is black market. I don't know what's going on, but I have found them on the internet, but I have never used them. So anyway, just letting you know that. In Europe, you don't need a prescription for these things as far as I know, but in the United States, you do. So that's what I think most people need to know about CGMs. There's a whole chapter on CGM use in Common Sense Labs, which is, if you want to get the book, that's at commonsenselabsbook.com. You can get the digital version or link to Amazon version from that site. So that might be a helpful place to look, especially if you're trying to hey, what are good blood glucose levels? Where do I want to stay within? What are the trends I want to make sure I see happen? So just wanted you guys to know that that is a place that has a resource for you. And then if you use a service like Levels or NutriSense, they have built-in coaching with the service in terms of they have a app, you're using their app to monitor your glucose. And in the app, it makes suggestions and tells you, this is a good range, this is a little high. Oh, look out, this is happening when you eat this food. So that gives you some feedback on that kind of thing. All right. Well, we've done a bit of a dive into blood glucose, and hopefully that was helpful for you today. And I will talk to you again next week. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm thrilled that you're part of the Keto fam. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.